Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning to everyone here and virtually. I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to all our partners. As Rebecca mentioned, none of this work would have been possible without the dedication and the collaboration and generosity that our partners shared with us. This report and all our case studies is a culmination of over 4 years of work that has been done in local settings looking at this issue of scaling. I also want to thank our team here at CUE, Maya, Molly, Brad, Jenny, and all of the Millions Learning team that has made this work possible, today possible, the convening possible. Brookings is a platform for advancing civil dialogue, so we try to be as transparent as possible with all of our work, and we want to share who has supported our work. This work has been supported both with funds and in-kind support from BHP Foundation, the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, Elma Foundation, through the Campaign for Female Education, Jacobs Foundation, the International Development Research Center in Canada, through the Foundation for Information Technology and Development, EAFET, and International Rescue Committee. So those are all some of the funding partners that we had that made this work possible. But activities that were supported by these partners reflects our understanding of the work. We maintain our independence. We are committed to quality, independence, and impact in our work. And the views that are expressed in the report are those of ours and do not reflect those of our donors. So before I begin the presentation, I want to go through some housekeeping activities or bullet points. There will be simultaneous interpretation, as Rebecca mentioned. Coffee and pastries are available to the left, and please do return the headsets before leaving. And this event is being live streamed, so hello to our online audiences. Today's event is a couple of quick things that we want to share. You have the reports. I will begin with a short overview of the major themes that speak to me out of this report. Then we'll get into a panel discussion on systems transformation, which my colleague Brad will lead. Then we have a World Café activity that will take place. We have our partners across the room. We'll share more information about how that will take place. You'll just go through different booths and learn about the individual partners. Then we'll have another panel that Jenny will lead. Then we'll close the day with some closing thoughts. So that's the run-off show for today. In the next few minutes, and I don't have a whole lot of time, but I will try to provide a general overview of the purpose of our research, our real-time scaling lab design, and highlight some headlines from our cross-lab report. You'll find the full findings in the report and the individual executive summaries that were printed at the front of the table. If you haven't picked up one, please do pick one up as you go out or during the breaks. We will delve into issues around scaling and systems transformation and how to move forward with scaling in our two panels in detail. And you'll have an opportunity to interact with our partners in the World Café. So the major themes that spoke out to me about scaling, education, systems transformation. Our research aimed to understand how education initiatives scale in context through a collaborative, participatory research design. Rebecca mentioned the importance of collaboration at the beginning, and that's at the heart of a lot of the work that we did with scaling and the work that we're doing moving forward. the idea that our understanding of how education takes place, how scaling takes place, how initiatives get scaled, it has to be understood in context and through an understanding of the local context, the challenges, the policies, the art of education in general. During our journey, we have gained many insights on the process, opportunities, limitations, challenges, and gaps in scaling education initiatives. The major points for me, number one, is that scaling is a complex, multidimensional process. It's not a technical 1, 2, 3 process that you can follow. It is possible to scale promising education interventions to bring out large-scale systematic change, but doing so requires alignment in thinking, motivation, incentives, and program design at the individual, institutional, and system levels. If all of these things align, there's a window of opportunity that opens up, and then scaling takes place within that window. At the system level, the formal and informal education structures form the educational experience and includes policies, practices, curriculum, and many other elements. We found that examples that the scaling initiatives must align with the overall priorities at the specific time and place for it to move from a small scale to a large-scale adoption into the system. At the institution level, whether the scaling is taking place within the Ministry of Education or within an NGO, it's critical to think and plan for scaling in a nonlinear way and to think beyond just the technical design, what I mentioned earlier and what Rebecca mentioned as well. The scaling process requires an adaptation and course corrections throughout, and initial plans will likely change. If you plan from the beginning, and our scaling teams will tell you this, you plan things at the beginning, you have to iteratively change and make adaptations as you go along. And this is at the institutional level. At the individual level, it's critical to have many champions for the initiatives. That was one of the key findings that we have. The champions are people who feel connected to the initiative, who feel motivated about the initiative, who see the potential of the initiative. But champions work in bureaucracies and they work in institutions with lots of turnover. And people change, their priorities change, their focus change. So champions have to be constantly cultivated. The case for your initiative has to be constantly made and maybe revised in terms of why you need to scale. Last point, and I'm getting the sign that my time is coming to an end. Not in life, but in here. Just we can't control everything in scaling, but we can do some things that help in the journey. We can involve stakeholders, create space for honest dialogue, use data in a timely manner, in a relevant manner that speaks to the audiences that we're looking for. Many times we just throw out data and we expect everybody to digest it and understand it and for the data to speak to them. Data is got context, it's got value, it has to speak to people that you're targeting. Finally, not every initiative needs to be scaled at all the levels of the system and across all localities and borders. You have to understand your initiative and figure out what is the optimum scale for the initiative. For some, it might be to meet the needs of a niche group that's marginalized. For others, it might be at the local level, at the national level. For others, it might be at cross-national and border levels. So these are all of the findings that we have had. The 2 panels in the World Café will give you more time to delve into the specifics of each one of these. I didn't go through all of these things, but they're in the report. Now, I don't want to take more time from the panels because that's where the heart of this discussion is. You will hear from our partners who live the scaling experience, and you'll have opportunities to ask questions. As Rebecca mentioned, for our virtual audiences, please tag Millions Learning and share your thoughts with us. I would like to now invite our first panel, and I would like to invite my colleague, Brad Olson, who's a senior fellow, and he leads the Millions Learning Initiative here at Brookings, to come to the stage and introduce the panel.
Seats right now.
Morning, everybody. What a treat this is. I am really delighted to be part of this conversation that we're going to have for the next few minutes as we sort of dig into some of the things that Omar had to share with us. I want to begin by introducing my esteemed panelists. Let's start with Dima Bibi, who's the Chief Executive Officer of INJAZ in Jordan, and then Tendakai Makuyi, Education Program Coordinator of Youth Impact in Botswana, and Heidi Rosby, the Senior Project Specialist for the International Rescue Committee in Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. And what I think I'll do is just spend a minute or two contextualizing the topics that we're going to discuss. And then I'd like to ask some questions to the panelists. And we'll have a conversation for a few minutes. And then I'd like to open it up to you all so that we've got time for some of your questions, as well as some questions from online folks that were previously submitted and that I've worked into some of the questions here. As Rebecca and Omar said, scaling is strange. It's a funny thing. Scaling public programs is different from scaling a product in the private sector. It's complex. It's nonlinear. It's not straightforward. It's not the process of simply rolling out a new innovation and then expecting that it's just going to take off. There are external environment influences, there are national politics, there are global trends, there's the influence of donor communities, there are external shocks to the system, perhaps a pandemic or devastating floods, there are personalities, there are staff turnover, there are all the complexities of this, and therefore scaling is as much learning by doing and trial and error and an imperfect science as it is some kind of a technical activity. And so we've got today representatives from 3 different scaling teams that have been engaged in this work for a while, and I'd like to talk with them about some of these complexities. Given the complexity of this work, the journey of scaling is as much about adaptation and changing course along the way in response to changed circumstances as it is any kind of straightforward, predictable process. And therefore, given the importance of adaptability or adaptation, the notion of trade-offs looms large. Most decisions that get made come with some kind of a sacrifice. If you make a decision to go in this direction, it might cost you a little bit here. There are multiple trade-offs that shape this work as it gets done. Some of those trade-offs include having to work through the tension between speed and depth. Another trade-off might be the contextualizing an innovation that was developed elsewhere into a new location, which is incredibly important, but costs money and time. A third is, as Rebecca brought up, the idea that scaling is not necessarily about scaling reach or coverage as much as, for us, scaling impact, making sure that the practices and the beliefs attached to the innovation become part of the system, part of the new normal, part of the everyday practices in the location. And that's incredibly difficult to do, especially when there are external incentives that are pushing for growing it, make it bigger, make it larger. Larger doesn't always necessarily mean better. And then finally, I think about the notion that there's a need for visible results that appear quickly And yet at the same time, if we're going to scale impact for systems change, for deep change in the lives of families and communities and children, it takes time. And so these are some of the trade-offs that scaling teams have to navigate. They have to understand them, they have to collect some data on them, they have to work through them, and they may have to make good decisions and then study the effects of the decisions they've made. And therefore, what I'd like to do is ask each of you, one at a time, to share with us one particular trade-off that you and your scaling team had to face, understand, and work through. Tendekai, why don't we begin with you?
Thank you so much, Brad. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tendekai, and I'm with Youth Impact. I'm the program coordinator for Teaching at the Right Level. Teaching at the Right Level is an education remedial approach that is designed to catch students that are falling behind in their basic numeracy and literacy. And what is unique about it is we group students according to ability and not grade level. In Botswana, we are scaling Teaching at the Right Level, working hand in glove with the government of Botswana. And it's the teachers that are scaling the program, it's the national service participants, which are volunteers that are employed by the government as well. So as Brad was saying, with bringing an innovation in a different setting requires a lot of adaptation so that it can be able to work in the context that you're in. I'm going to be talking about the trade-off of cost versus contextualization. One of the critical elements of Teaching at the Right Level is the professional development training for the teachers or the instructors that are going to deliver the program. And Teaching at the Right Level training is designed to run for 10 days, where we are given skills to the teachers of how to use the approach when they go in the schools, how to monitor it, how to do lesson plans, and so forth. So it really worked well in Botswana in the early days when we were not reaching a lot of schools, when we were not working with a lot of teachers. But as we are scaling the program, 10 days requires a lot of inputs. When we do the training, we bring all the teachers that we are working with in a central region where it needs a training venue. It's going to need feeding, it's going to need transport. There's a lot of logistics that are surrounding it. And what the pandemic, COVID pandemic also did was that resources are no longer readily available with the government. The government had to reduce the budgets, they had to reallocate. So we also had to be adaptable if we want to scale the program. Currently, we are in over half of the regions in Botswana, and we are still going on. And we still want to work with the government. So we had to adapt and reduce the training days from 10 to 5 days. What we did in this was that we made sure that we are now doing a very targeted training, a training that is engaging. There's no more downtime. That is, we had to remove that. And also with the content itself, we had to augment it with videos. We accelerated creating videos that we give the participants so that they can be able to see how to introduce concepts and can be able to refer back to it. And most of the 10 days, we also realized it was not really about the content itself. We realized that we were giving participants a time to practice. When you introduce something, you give them time to practice. So what we did with that was we gave them homework. After each day, we give them homework. They go and create a lesson plan. They bring it back to us. We review it. We give them feedback. They go home and create videos, actually delivering the program. They shoot it with their phone. When they send it to us overnight, we look at it in the morning. We give them feedback. So we maintained the fidelity of the program, but we reduced the days. And we also made our partners happy. We had to contextualize the program. So that is the trade-off that we had to do. And the benefits of this trade-off, actually, during COVID, it meant that people are safer. We are not bringing people in for a lot of time in closed rooms. 5 days was enough, and we support them even virtually as they go. We send them text messages that are giving them tips of implementation. And also in these groups that they are able to even support each other better, feeding off from their peers, because we create WhatsApp groups where we put the teachers, the heads of department. When they're facing any challenge in their school, when they go back, they send it in. Before we can even respond, you find that a teacher from school A has experienced it and has had a solution to it. And another benefit that is there, obviously, is the cost itself. We have now reduced cost of people traveling in, the lodging, even people time, because taking 10 days away from the teachers from the classroom was a lot. So now it's 5 days, and it's palatable. When you go and introduce the program to a new region, they are ready to accept it, because 5 days is not much, and also the costs that are associated with it are not much. And the program is scalable, because we always continuously want to have a minimum viable product that is scalable for impact, especially with our partners. So having done this, it has really helped us to have a product that is scalable and can be used across the regions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm reminded that an innovation is oftentimes very complex. It's got a lot of moving parts, and we can't necessarily get all of those in the scaling process, and thinking through what you're willing to sacrifice and what you're willing not to sacrifice becomes important. And then you also remind me that sometimes what seems like a trade-off at first becomes an unanticipated set of benefits if you're paying attention to it. Thank you so much. Dima?
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And I want to take this chance also to thank Brookings for their amazing support of our scaling journey. And it has been a fabulous journey that started 9 years ago. And throughout this journey, we had to make many trade-offs. It was about navigating trade-offs for the most part of it. In Jordan, what we did, our goal was to mainstream financial education within the national education system. So every child in every school, public, private, refugee school, would learn financial education and entrepreneurship. And we achieved that goal now. Our actually students who started with us 9 years ago are now in their 9th year in colleges. I think the interesting thing about trade-offs is that there's no one decision every time. There's no one path, there's no one priority. Priorities change throughout the cycle. And that we found interesting. And to give an example of a trade-off that we had to deal a lot with at Injaz is the trade-off between speed and depth. And I'll give you examples on that, because I think this is a very interesting dialogue that kept taking place and was complex. It was not straightforward, especially that we had adopted a multi-stakeholder approach. So there were lots of stakeholders and partners on the decision-making table. The decisions weren't necessarily smooth, especially at the beginning, at the planning phase. Trades-off you have to deal with much more of them. So to give examples, early on when we had to make decision on which grade to start with and what grades to cover, there were two groups of people. One group was very keen that we focus on depth and start with grade 1 and grow every year until we reach grade 12. The other school of thought was, no, we have issues. We have a major problem of very poor financial inclusion in Jordan. We need to focus on those who are about to go to the market. We have a serious youth unemployment issue in Jordan. So we want to focus on grades 11 and 12. And eventually, the decision was somewhere balanced. So we started with the 7th grade, but and grew 1 grade every year. But as we started with the 7th grade, we also started with a temporary curricula for grade 11. And then we grew, and when the 7th graders, those who started with us, finished the 10th grade, we rewrote grade 11 and 12, and then they continued. And of course, it was built on the previous knowledge and skills they built. Another example on the same trade-off was when we wanted to make a decision on how to write the content, and this was a major decision, because it was an internal decision at that point. We thought we were the experts. We've been doing financial education for many years before. It's just much faster to do it on our own, writing content with multiple committees and different parties is a nightmare. And it turned out to be a nightmare. But it was tough at the beginning. And I remember, and I always say that, the first book we had, grade 7, when we thought the final version was there, went back and forth 17 times until everyone was okay with that version. But a year or two later, it was just a smooth and an easy process because we started understanding each other, aligning, and there was trust built, etc. A decision quickly that went wrong, and we didn't necessarily pick the right choice at that time, was when we wanted to decide what teacher training model to adopt. So we had two options. One was, again, focusing on let's do it fast. We don't have much time. So we train the trainers and then there's a cascade model where the trainers, the supervisors, teach the teachers or train the teachers. The other model was teaching teachers directly, and that was a lengthy model. So we went with the first one. However, our assessment of the performance showed that there was significant times lost knowledge within that process. And when we analyzed, we figured out that the teachers' training, the TOT had caused a lot of that. So we changed, and talking about adaptation, Brad, we changed our path and we started doing direct teachers training. And finally, sometimes you simply don't have a choice. Like when COVID hit, and we were barely starting the idea of digitizing the financial education program. And we didn't have interactive platforms. We didn't have a solid digital version. But the choice, I think, at that time was go digital or die. So we did go digital. It wasn't as impactful, but the other choice was to not be there. And I'll stop here.
Thanks very much. It reminds me, I think it was the economist John Maynard Keynes who said, for every complex problem, there's a solution that's simple, straightforward, and wrong. And you also remind me that there's a paradox here, which is that successful scaling requires a huge number of people to get involved, and yet involving a huge number of people is never simple. Absolutely. Thank you. Heidi.
I think that last point leads into what I'm going to talk about as well. So I'm speaking today about Ahlan Simsim. The Ahlan Simsim initiative is one of IRC with Sesame Workshop, supporting early childhood development in Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. And we combine and integrate educational media from, I'm sure everyone here knows Sesame Street and the Muppets. We're combining that and integrating it into services for young children ages 0 to 8 years old, along with their caregivers. And one of the core focuses of Ahlan Simsim is scaling early childhood outcomes with national partners across these countries I mentioned. And because ECD, or early childhood development, is cross-sectoral, this means scaling also with ministries of education, health, and social development. So talk about complexity here. I want to share an example of one of the, I think this involves multiple trade-offs in this example, when we were starting off our work with the Ministry of Health in Jordan. And we were, we were new to this relationship and building this up, and the ministry came to us to get involved with a smoking cessation campaign. This had been identified in Jordan as a big public health issue, and they wanted us to combine forces and support with content development. And now, there's a clear link to early childhood development. We all know the harmful effects of secondhand smoke on young children. But it also was certainly nothing that was part of our vision for scaling early childhood outcomes. So this felt like, where does this fit into what we're doing as Ahlan Simsim? And we also knew that this would be, frankly, it looked like at that time a bit of a diversion of resources and staff time. Do we say yes to this? But we did say yes. And what that did was through that process of working with the ministry on this campaign, we built up trust, we developed a strong relationship, and we established ourselves as a credible partner. And one of the key pieces of that is that when we initially went to the ministry, we said, look, we're not pushing our own agenda on you. We're saying, what are your national needs? And they came to us and said, this is something that's a national need. And so we were also, leading in the way that we wanted to show up as a real partner to the ministry. But that process also opened the door for us then to have wider exploration with the ministry of where within the system supporting early childhood, where were there real needs to strengthen the system and shift the system through health. So where we are today, we are now working with the ministry to expand and scale up early childhood development integrated into primary healthcare centers. So when a parent brings their young child in for every well child visit, the healthcare provider is now providing age-appropriate resources, support, tools, all of these pieces to support healthy development. And when we look back at that scaling journey getting to this point, we can see very clearly in our analysis that that moment when we said yes to this thing that looked a little bit off, that was a critical defining moment allowing us to get here. But we also know we couldn't have said yes to that without two things. And one was flexibility, both of our internal approach and importantly of the funding, that we were able to shift resources and say yes to this. And the other piece is that time, because we knew we had a long enough runway to invest in this initial piece of the partnership while still keeping that longer game in mind.
Great, thank you. And your example reminds me, Dr. Sempeho and I were talking 2 weeks ago in Tanzania, and he was talking about the Learner Guides program and CAMFED, and mentioning that sometimes when you give something up, you actually get something more in return. And this reminds me of this kind of back and forth that requires trust and collaboration. Thank you. I want to make sure that we've got time for questions and answers, but I do want to go through one more round of a question. Maybe we'll kind of do it as a lightning round. But in the global development space around education these days, there's an awful lot of talk about systems change and transforming education systems. I think in some ways it's a concept that's sort of filling up the rooms, filling up the oxygen of the room. And I hear people say, does it or does it not fit within scaling? Are these antithetical? Are they complementary? And so I want to maybe just offer a too short and too simple explanation of what perhaps systems change is, and then ask you all if you see the scaling work that you all have been a part of as fitting within a systems lens. And so if you think about systems transformation, one way of coming at it is to understand that any location is a set of system parts. These system parts are always inextricably connected to each other. And so if you're going to make one change in one part of a location, you have to think about how it's going to affect and be affected by all of the other interactions in the system parts. And I think that means two things in particular. One of them is it's the interaction among the system parts that is actually the energy of change or stasis. And secondly, that we shouldn't only think about hard systems, resources and policies, but also soft systems, cultural ways of thinking, practices, and mindsets. So within this sort of systems lens, some people will say, well, I will say, that if we're not careful, a systems lens or a systems approach can be so diffuse that it's almost impossible to get a handle on, to manage. And so perhaps scaling offers a concrete driver that can attach itself to one or more system parts in a way that changes the interaction among the system as a whole. And so given that, I'd like to ask each of you, do you see the scaling work of which you're a part as fitting within this scaling and systems change framework? Tendeke, maybe I'll start with you.
Thank you, Brad. Wow, this is a very interesting question because we see it every day happening with the work that we are doing with scaling teaching at the right level in the schools. I think TAL fits very, very well in the systems change framework because it changes the way teachers do things in the classroom. It changes the setup of the classroom itself. TAL classes are fun, and I know classes are supposed to be fun, but that is not what is happening. So when you are bringing the innovation to a school, you're expecting the teacher to be creative it also takes a mindset change of the teacher, him or herself. So I see that as a of the systems change. And when we are doing teaching at the right level in the classes, it's different from a normal class. There's going to be change that is going to take place because students normally in classes, they sit in rows, they sit on chairs, they are mixed up where the ability is, different abilities are sitting together. But when we bring teaching at the right level, we are saying that for a teacher to be able to do differentiated learning, they have to group students by ability. And students are not supposed to be in rows. Students are sitting down, learning on the floor. People who have seen teaching at the right level, it can happen anywhere. So even teachers, I've seen schools where they are saying classes cannot go on because there's no classes, there's a shortage of classes. But with teaching at the right level, we are saying even under a tree, classes can go on, students can be able to learn. And also the content delivery itself. Most of the time, teachers are running after the syllabus where they know within a set time I'm supposed to be teaching addition with carryover. But we are saying there are mixed abilities in your class. There are students who are not even able to recognize numbers. What are you saying about them? You need to create content each day or lesson plans each day that can be able to bring targeted instruction. So this is the change that we are talking about, that the innovation is bringing. Are teachers ready to accept it or not? We have seen that most of the time they talk about the workload. But we are saying, what workload are you bringing or talking about? Teaching at the right level is actually making it easier for you. Because the learning gains, in Botswana we have rapid results. We track the work that we are doing, and we've seen the learning gains are amazing, are very effective. So this is what we are talking about. And even the teaching materials themselves. At foundational learning, students learn better from concrete to abstract. So we bring in locally available resources, your sticks, your stones, to introduce concepts of numeracy. This is what we are telling the teachers to be able to do so that they can also be able to bring children that are lagging behind to grade level and they can learn together. I think I've mentioned quite a bit on that. The classroom setup change, the TAO classes are fun. So I think mindset change. You're talking about the soft skills that the systems change framework is bringing. Mindset change is what teaching at the right level is bringing to the schools and to the teachers. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. Dima?
I think I'm going to start where Tende ended, the mindset. And this is a very key point when we talk about system change. I think one of the reasons why we were able, I believe, to contribute to really improving and changing the system is that we started this whole journey with a mindset of we did not think of our scaling, our mainstreaming as a project. We thought of it as an opportunity to change the system. We did not, when we started, we had a theory of change. We did not have a project inputs and project outputs and that type of thinking. So that enabled us to look at everything differently and enabled us to be able to work with a big number of stakeholders. We also understood the ecosystem. So we understood that the problem we have, which actually drove the solution, was a structural problem within the education system. It was very complex. No one party could have, not the education system itself, could not have solved it alone. So it needed a multi-sectoral and lots of partners aligned, engaged, continuously talking and discussing. And moving from the classroom level to the institution level, which is the Ministry of Education, elements that we focused on that were transformational is that we made sure we give real attention to the capacity of those within the Ministry of Education who are going to take care of this, of sustainability and moving and transferring ownership. We established a new structure that was not there within the Ministry of Education specifically for the support of financial education with expertise on board that structure. We managed resistance. Resistance was a big issue teachers did not want an extra topic to teach. So that is when we knew if we're out and they're not happy and they're resisting it, the second day it'll go. So managing resistance was something very important. And also, and this is where the real-time scaling lab comes in beautifully, we really fostered the culture of learning together and exploring and verifying, testing, seeing what works, brainstorming and piloting and adapting and all that. So it became the norm, which is totally new to the institution. So there were many elements where we were able, at the institutional level, we were able to change the course of things, how they were done. And they are all transformative, but I think I want to highlight one that I thought was specifically probably disruptive to the way things were done, which is it was the first time ever in the history of Jordan where someone outside the Ministry of Education mainstreams, writes, delivers, train the teachers of a national curricula that is mainstreamed in every classroom and is a mandatory. So that was a first. We had a very traditional closed education system that opened up, and today it's opening up to others. But we were the first ones who kept knocking on the door until we managed to open it. And now there's a digital skills that will be mainstreamed soon. There's something that has to do with media, etc. So that is, I think these are examples I wanted to share.
Great, super interesting. Thanks. Heidi?
So as we're in this process right now of looking across our scaling journeys across the 4 countries where we're working, I think this question of where systems change fits in, where system strengthening fits in, and when we're looking at what pathways have moved forward at what points and why, that question of what changes to the system, we think were key enablers at that moment in time. So one example comes to mind that I really think of as a change around the ecosystem of the child, who are the adults in their space and other factors. And in our work in Iraq with the Ministry of Education, we've co-developed a school readiness program. So this supports children who are entering grade 1 without any prior pre-primary experience, which by some estimates is upwards of 90% of the country. And core features of the school readiness program are social emotional learning and learning through play. So that learning through play as a pedagogical approach in particular was very new to the Iraqi educational environment when we were introducing this. So the Ministry of Education piloted this program in 2021 in one governorate, and 2 really interesting things stood out when we were looking back at our analysis. And one was that parents who had children enrolled in classrooms who were not part of the pilot program were seeing what was happening in those classrooms, and they were seeing the effects that it was having on those children and how they were having an easier transition into primary school. And they were saying, wait, I want my kid to be in that classroom. Then the other piece is that teachers were really excited about this. And teachers were talking to their friends who weren't part of the pilot. So we heard over and over again through anecdotal evidence cases where teachers who had not been trained on the program were actually doing activities in their classrooms because their friends told them, hey, this activity worked really well with my first graders. So when we look at this, we say, wow, this demand was increased by the parents, and also the supply side and enthusiasm of the teachers to be engaged in this was also increased. So in 2022, the ministry expanded it across all of federal Iraq, again in select schools, and then they're now committed to scaling up starting in fall 2023, so coming up soon. And we know that some of those key factors we're seeing, what they were seeing of parents having this increased demand and how excited their teachers were to engage in this. So these are these key factors that we're seeing, wow, that was a change in pieces of the system that we couldn't have predicted at the beginning, but they were fundamental to moving this forward.
Great, thank you. It occurs to me that the your TARL program inserted a teaching approach that actually changed the system of the classroom and the school level. And then here's the notion of a program that was inserted in the ministry and changed the institution as a system. And then here, even moving outward, is the idea of an initiative that actually changed the entire ecosystem. So 3 different system levels, each of which was changed through a strategic scaling impact endeavor. Great. I think we have a couple of minutes, and I would love to field a few questions. And I think that, yes, I think we'll go first, that, and then you. Please go ahead, and if you don't mind using the microphone, I think that would be particularly helpful.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. My name is Peggy Dubeck. I'm with RTI International, and I have a question about the solution that you had with the TARL program to move the training from having the children, or not the children, the teachers modeling and then moving to the videos and providing that feedback of someone else watching those videos and then giving feedback. I'm curious if that led to some, how that affected the system of who was viewing the videos, and who, I assume at the beginning there probably wasn't enough people available to watch those videos quickly to be able to give them back the next day. So I'm interested in that process and what the outcomes of that, like maybe the unintended benefits of that were.
All right, thank you so much for your question. So during our training, we are providing these videos so that when they go home on that day, they do watch the videos and create lesson plans that they intend bring the following day, and we are able to review while they are there. So we are not giving these videos in the hope that when they go home, they're going to listen to them another day. So within that 5 days, our training is very intense. We are providing these materials on top of the targeted instruction of the training that we are given. And our trainings run within a school setup. We use a school hall. So we still do have practice session where they work with the students on the last day. After the 5-day training, we make sure that they have a chance to work with the children. We are observing and we give them feedback as well. So we have not relegated the feedback and the practice to be all remote or virtual. They still have some practice time, but it is reduced from the 10 days.
Amy Bernath from IREX. To briefly answer the question, I think that some of our scaled work is systems change and some of it isn't, but all of the sustainable without project funding changes are systems changes. The question I have is about measurement. So good systems change work requires changing incentives. I think that's part of the report. Changing incentives requires changing policies, and changing policies requires being transparent and equitable. You can't incentivize teachers to do pre-service teacher education and get better pay and randomly select which teachers get that incentive and which don't. So my question is about the type of measurement that's needed to prove these approaches and how we get funding for that type of measurement. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an important question. Who would like to take it on?
I can take it. Yes, it's a very important question. And I think one thing that we didn't do very well at the beginning is we did not monitor and evaluate very early on as we should. We followed up, but there wasn't enough data collection. But 2 years along the line, we realized that we started doing that much more, and we realized that the feedback we got from the field enforces us to change certain decisions. Some teachers, for example, were not necessarily engaged. That, we assumed, the topic is done in a very interesting way, delivery methods, blah, blah. So teachers will be all over it. And some teachers were just not interested. So we introduced the incentive system to teachers, and not necessarily financial, but non-financial as well. And that did change their engagement a lot, I have to say. Also, data that we collected throughout, so we did at the first part of it. Remember, this is a 9-year project. The first part of it was evaluating the performance. How are teachers doing? How are the students, later on, what are the students learning? How much they're learning, etc. But just recently, and I hope I get somehow later on, we get the chance to launch or talk about the findings of the impact assessment that was done, because recently, just this year, 2 months ago, the impact assessment of the students who started at 7th grade and now are in the second year of university, they took those students, compared them with the students who are a little bit older, so 3rd and 4th year at the university and just graduated, and they found a huge difference in the knowledge and skills and attitude of those kids who started at 7th grade. So, I mean, it's like, we knew that we could feel and sense it throughout our, field work and talking with the teachers and parents and students. But when you see it in data, both quantitative and qualitative data, it's different. It validates everything that you've been doing.
Thanks. Tendekai, and then Heidi.
Yeah, thank you. In Botswana, teachers are supposed to do remediation. There is remedial time that is on the timetable, even though the teachers have not been doing it. So what we are bringing in, we are saying at the time that had been allocated by the ministry for you to work with students that are lagging behind, use teaching at the right level. That is number one. And our work is data-driven. Before we work with children, we assess them. We do baseline assessments to see the level which they are at so that we can be able to meet them at the point of need. We can be able to do targeted instruction. Then we have a midline and then the end line. What we have seen with these results, because we share the results with the teachers, with the schools, what we have seen with these results, they've really helped us in getting the uptake of the program in the schools. Because teachers are seeing what is possible. Teachers are seeing the students that they'd relegated to be a D student or an E student. Within 30 days, that child is able to add, that child is able to do multiplication, something they never thought that child would be able to do. And what these results have done, because we have done an A-B, we are in the process of doing an A-B testing on the teacher perceptions as well, on the learning of the child. We are realizing that teachers' perceptions are changing when they see the rapid results and the learning gains that the students are performing. Their perceptions as well to the program have changed. To say, this class where people are doing chanting, icebreakers, sticks and stones, is actually bringing a change to the life of the child. Because at first there is resistance. Why do we have to do icebreakers before a lesson? Why do we have to use sticks and stones? Why do we? But now when they see the results, I think results really work well in building momentum, whether it's at school level or ministry level.
Thank you. Heidi?
Yeah, I'll just say shortly. So the example I was giving of working with teachers in Iraq, one piece is that this is integrated into the first 2 weeks of the school year. So we're not really asking teachers to do extra, we're asking to do different, but that's still something that requires a shift, right? And one of the things we did find out of the pilot was that there was a bit too much, so some things need to be pulled back to make it more easy to actually get through all of that curriculum. But something interesting on measurement, so after the pilot, we as IRC, we were running all of the monitoring and evaluation of that. But as we moved into the expansion phase, this is all run by the Ministry of Education that's taking that forward. We do hope over time that we can do, what point in time is the best moment to do a full-on impact evaluation, and that's something we're hoping that is in the future, and also questioning where do you wait till it's fully at scale and see how does quality at scale maintain itself, all of those pieces. The other thing that I think is just a little bit of a shift, but I think is also important, is what does measurement and learning and evaluation look like of the process itself? And we're thinking about systems change and sustained impact and all those pieces. Those, we all know, this is what we spent many years all together looking at, but it's very hard to really look at what are the best ways to measure that. So this is more an open question to the group of, more bright ideas, please share.
Yeah, thank you. And it reminds me that I think a lot of the work needs to be longitudinal. It needs to be mixed methods. It needs to be locally driven in many cases. It needs to look at how effects on communities and families last over time. I'm so sorry, folks. We're out of time. I want to say that it seems to me that education quality requires, by definition, equity. And equity, by definition, requires relevance. And relevance, by definition, requires demand-driven initiatives that are thoughtfully and carefully scaled for systems impact. And so I couldn't be more honored to have shared the stage with the three of you all and to learn more about these really impressive initiatives. So thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We're so delighted to have you here with us today. We're going to change it up a little bit and do something different called a World Café. So as you can see, the live stream is going to be paused for the next 40 minutes. So everyone online, we hope you'll rejoin us at 10:40 Eastern Time. But as you can see, there are posters around the room that give more details She's just getting mic'd.
I think we're starting. That is my cue. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the World Café and learning more about the individual cases, as well as the scaling labs that were accompanying them and learning alongside them. And if you are interested in more details, we not only will have the coffee break after, we'll encourage you to speak with our partners who are here, but also, as Brad and Omar mentioned, there are copies of the summaries of each of the case studies as outside, and they can also certainly be downloaded online, as well as the full report with much more information and details. I also want to extend a very warm welcome to our virtual audience for either joining or rejoining us now. And in particular, I just really wanted to extend a welcome to our Scaling Lab partners, many of whom are certainly in the room, but around the world, many of whom are joining us virtually. I was really amazed to see the total numbers of partners who've been participating in this collective learning process over the past 5 years. There have been more than 750 individuals who have been actively and continuously participating in the scaling and system change transformation conversations over the past years. So just a warm welcome to you all. I would like to remind you all that this session in particular will have simultaneous interpretation in both English and French. I know a number of you probably didn't grab a headset because the conversation to date has been in English, but if you don't have one, you'll want one now, because one of our panelists in particular speaks French. So unless you're fluent in both English and French, please take a moment. Feel free to go outside right now and grab a headset. They're out there. Just a friendly public service announcement to please return them at the end. So great. I see a number of you all grabbing your headsets now. Channel 8 will be for English and Channel 1 for French. So feel free to set that depending on the language. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists who are with us. And this session is really to dive a bit more into the recommendations in the report. So how do we think about taking all of these findings and insights and lessons forward, both in each respective country and initiative, but certainly those others who are out there working to scale and sustain the impact of the innovations, the initiatives that you all are part of. And I just want to say personally how thrilled I am to be sharing a stage with all of you. It really feels like a family reunion, right? It feels like a family reunion out here. It feels like a family reunion looking out in the audience, one that you really want to be at. And so it's just really, really such a pleasure. And it's hard to believe that it was more than 5 years ago that we started all this work together, right? And I just keep reflecting on what a tremendous amount has been achieved, again, in your respective countries, but also across these real-time scaling labs, and how much we've all learned. And just to say a word on what these real-time scaling labs are, I think because it feels like a family reunion, maybe we've been taking it for granted that you all are aware what the real-time scaling labs are. But it really was, in some ways, an experiment that we started with partners around the world more than 5 years ago to say, can we come together in a participatory action research process to accompany initiatives that are already in the process of scaling? So even if Brookings and partners were not involved, these initiatives are in the process of scaling in all different ways within the respective countries. But can we do a few things by accompanying that process? One, can we really learn more deeply about these complex questions we're discussing today around scaling and systems change? You know, we talk a lot about these principles behind scaling and systems transformation, but what do they really look like in practice? And what do they look like in different contexts and with different populations and communities? And then secondly, can we take this learning and capture it and try to synthesize it and codify it in a way that it can support these initiatives as they're scaling? And to document, thirdly, those journeys so it not only directly feeds back to and informs those initiatives, but that there are also lessons and transferable insights that could be shared with others. So that was really the intention behind these real-time scaling labs, to learn more deeply about the scaling process, to support these efforts, and to document it as it's happening in real time. So without further ado, I'd love to turn it to you all. And maybe I'll introduce you from my immediate left and go down the line. To my left, I have Fostan Kofi, who's an Inspector General with the Ministry of National Education in Côte d'Ivoire, and has also served as our Scaling Lab Manager with the Scaling Lab in Côte d'Ivoire. And Fostan will certainly talk about the focus of the Scaling Lab there, which is focused on the government-led process of adapting, implementing, and scaling teaching at the right level. So another adaptation of teaching at the right level that you heard about, which again, as Tendakai explained this morning, is a remedial education approach that teaches foundational literacy and math by grouping children together according to their actual learning level rather than by age or grade. And it also includes continuous assessment, as well as playful and engaging teaching approaches. Côte d'Ivoire was one of the first countries to take teaching at the right level from India and adapt it to sub-Saharan Africa, and as I believe, the first Francophone country to do so. To Fostan's left, we have Barbara Chalangwa, who's an executive advisor with CAMFED, as well as a former permanent secretary of education in Zambia, and a Scaling Lab manager of our lab in Tanzania. And that lab, and what you'll hear more about, has focused on scaling CAMFED's Learner Guide program, which is an approach on delivering engaging life skills to secondary school students in Tanzania, but it's delivered in a really innovative way through young female graduates who have just finished secondary schools themselves. And they're empowered and trained and volunteer to come back to secondary school and teach the life skills program during the school for 18 months. So Barbara will certainly share more about that initiative as it's been working closely with government and other partners scaling across the country. And then Dr. Ali Yagi, who is the general manager of the Al Hussein Fund for Excellence in Jordan. And Dr. Ali has been a pillar of certainly the work in the financial education program in Jordan, but certainly all of the work of the real-time scaling labs around the world. And as you'll hear from Dr. Ali, the lab in Jordan has been focused on the financial education program that Dima spoke about this morning, this 8-year phased rollout of mainstreaming financial literacy across secondary school and all schools in Jordan. And then finally, we have Mosepi Macheng, who is the co-founder and program coordinator of Youth Impact, formerly known as Young Love, for those who have been following their work through the years. And as you heard from her colleague Tendakai this morning, she's also, been the co-scaling lab manager of the lab there, which, as you heard from Tendakai, has focused on, again, an adaptation of teaching at the right level in Botswana. So, again, more than 5 years ago, we started this work together. You fast forward to today, and each of these initiatives in a variety of different ways have scaled strategically, reaching many more children and young people with critical knowledge and skills. And as you've also heard from this morning, it has been anything but a simple or straightforward process, right? It's been one, as been described, where there's been continuous refinement and learning, some planned adaptations, some completely unplanned pivots and reacting to changes in the environment and circumstances, but all with this data-driven learning sort of woven throughout. And so while we'll only have a chance to scratch the surface in the next 30 minutes or so, really want to take this opportunity to have a conversation with you all about, again, how do we take some of these findings and insights forward? And then we'll open it up to the audience for some questions. So without further ado, I'd love to start the conversation. And I'd say a central theme in the report, and one of our primary recommendations, is around this question of institutionalization. And by that, I mean, how does one infuse or embed an initiative throughout a government system? And while that's not the only approach to scaling, right? Scaling and spreading it happens in all different ways. When it comes to education, we certainly find that if one wants to scale and sustain the impact of an education initiative, it's really hard not to think about integrating into, right, the official system, the policies, the structures, the people, the processes. But what this exactly means and what this looks like is a whole other question, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think each of you have been involved with initiatives that are doing this, but doing this in different ways and coming from different starting points. So if I think about you, Fostan, and you, Dr. Ali, the initiatives of teaching at the right level, known as PEC in Côte d'Ivoire, and the financial education program was really started within the government, right? With the support of many partners. And if I think about the Learner Guide program in Tanzania, and I think about teaching at the right level adaptation in Botswana, in some ways it was very much started by actors and partners outside the formal government system. But again, as Tendakai said, hand in glove with the government from the start. So my question for you all is, as you all had the same ambition to integrate in the system, and as you all took different pathways and approaches, what would be one or two sort of key insights or factors you think that were very instrumental in that process of integration and institutionalization? So if it's okay, I'd love to start with you, Fostan. And this is where you'll want your headset.
Merci. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. It is a great opportunity for me to be able to share our experience from Côte d'Ivoire in the process of scaling up targeted teaching. It all started very fast with national assessments that needed to be conducted that highlighted the very low level that our children had. They had low levels of literacy and numeracy. And so the Ministry for Education had a duty, which is to provide quality education to all children, and that made the authorities of the ministry realize what the situation was, and they needed to find a solution. We tried several approaches, and we decided to go for the teaching at a right level approach. And in terms of ownership and institutionalization, the ministry was the one that needed to find a solution to this issue that is connected to the learning crisis that we were undergoing. We were very lucky to work hand in hand with partners, and as far as changes are concerned, we were around the same table. So those partners and us were all around the same table. We were not going to have decisions made only by experts at ministry level. We had all our partners, so NGOs, funding partners, technical partners, all together sitting at the same table, and we started the thinking process together to try to address the learning crisis in a sustainable way. That is how we started, with the support of several partners, including Brookings. And then we gradually moved on to scaling it up because we needed to be able to provide a quality education to all children in Côte d'Ivoire. And that means that when the approach is positive and we have concrete data, we need to be able to use this approach and to provide it to all teachers in the country so that all students can benefit from it. This is why we decided that we needed to learn from this scaling opportunity, and that we were very happy to be accompanied by Brookings. we can say that we worked with several partners, so financial partners, technical partners, but the ministry's ownership of the approach means that the technical component that we had at very beginning translated into an assistance contract. We are independent enough now to have our own approach. We have Tarl Africa and Abidjan with us, so with assistance contracts that are signed with us, because they have already transferred all the necessary skills for us to make this sustainable. To gradually scale it up, since our scaling up plan has been drafted, and we have recommendations to be able to provide all children in Côte d'Ivoire access to quality education. So this is what can be said about what we have been doing.
Thank you so much, Fostan. You know, I'm struck by so many of the salient findings that we identified, right, throughout the past few years that you just spoke of. The importance of starting with the problem, right? How the government really started with this assessment of what was the challenges faced, what were really behind the learning crisis, which is certainly not unique to Côte d'Ivoire, and then thinking through a menu of different evidence-based interventions, what might be possible to address that. And as you said, starting to experiment and perhaps starting small, and as through learning and iteration, changing along the way. So thank you for that. And then this notion of government ownership and certainly government-led, but with the diverse stakeholders around the table. And I'm struck with, you know, very much, I think one of the intentions of the Real-Time Scaling Lab and what you spoke about the diversity of partners was how do we try to bring the system into the room, recognizing that we all just see one part of the education system and have various roles to play. So how do we think about bringing those various partners around the table in support of a shared goal? So thank you for that. Dr. Ali, could I turn to you?
Certainly.
So if you were, same question. If you were giving, say, a piece of advice to someone looking to integrate an initiative from outside within the government system, what would you share?
Well, first, good morning, everybody. And thank you very much, Jenny, and thanks for the Brookings team. Let me tell you about our experience, and perhaps that will give you an idea how we started and what the approach we have taken. Now, we are all aware of the financial international crisis that happened in 2008. Now, actually, those crises triggered all government leaders and educators of the importance and the pressing need of financial awareness and financial literacy among the societies, among all sectors of the society. Now, and that's why at that time many organizations and the programs have started in 2009 onward to create financial inclusion strategies, financial awareness strategies, and so on. Now, some of the organizations that started to create the financial strategies and financial awareness was AFI, the Association of Financial Inclusion. The OECD started some programs of creating financial literacy and financial awareness. And actually, the idea is to be able to overcome any potential or any possible problems that might occur later on. Now, that's why many countries all over the world started their own national financial inclusion strategy. And one main pillar of that strategy was financial literacy and financial education. In Jordan, we've started our first national financial strategy was launched in 2018 for 2 years. And one of its main pillars was the creating financial awareness among all sectors of the Jordan society. But actually, our program started well before that, started in 2014. In 2014, we had really a visionary, strong central bank governor. And he picked the idea and thought that Jordan should start its own financial literacy program. And I remember in 2014, before we launched that program, we did some study across all the region and even the world, just to look at other experiences of national strategies and national financial literacy systems. And all of them were probably bubbles here and there. But he wouldn't accept that. He wanted something to be really inserted within the educational system of Jordan. That's why he gathered all possible stakeholders and beneficiaries, and we had many meetings before that. He tried to convince every potential stakeholder of the benefits that they're going to get out of that program. So for educators, for social government organizations and non-government organizations, and for the Ministry of Education, and at that time we called Dima from Injaz because she was recommended, Injaz was recommended as one of the pioneer organizations in Jordan that can implement a program like that. And we had a meeting. Now, after that meeting, let me mention something. Now, all that governance and networking needed actually the financial support. So we had a meeting with the banks, or the governor had a meeting with banks in Jordan, and said, look, guys, we want to increase financial inclusion in Jordan. And you're going to benefit out of that, because at that time, the banking community in Jordan was 24%. 24% of the Jordanian were banked. But he thought that financial literacy will increase that community. And that's why he asked all banks in Jordan to contribute 1.5 thousandths of their income, local income, to that project. Of course, later on, he asked the banks to add, actually to increase that to 3 thousandths of their, 3 thousandths, probably we think of the thousandth as a small, no, when you talk about banks, the 3 thousandths can really cover a project like that. Now, afterwards, directly, I remember the governor wrote to the prime minister, and the prime minister created 2 main national committees. One of them is the National Steering Committee for the project, and another one, the Technical Committee of the project. So if we talk about our project, actually, it was forced, well, not forced, but it was really pushed from top down. Okay, it was built later on bottom up, but the actual decision and the actual policy and the actual governance and networking was done from top to bottom. But then we started building the components, the Lego parts, bottom up, until we achieved the project. Now, when we started the National Financial Inclusion Strategy of Jordan in 2018, now we didn't have to create that pillar of financial education. We just took that project and inserted it within the strategy. Now, in 2020, we've started a new strategy, and again, that program is part of that strategy. As Dima mentioned this morning, by December 2022, we have finished the second phase of that project. We have delivered all the curricula and the whole material of the project to the Ministry of Education, but we have signed a new agreement to extend that project for till mid-2026, because we wanted really to update our curricula to include new topics in finance, like digital financial techniques, like green economics, like eco-economics, and so on. So our project, I don't know whether this gave an idea about how we...
Absolutely, and it makes me think, I mean, you mentioned that Jordan really benefited from having leadership and political commitment at some of the highest levels, right? The central bank governor, the prime minister, alignment with the national policy of financial inclusion. So a lot of these sort of core ingredients, if you will, were in place. And maybe, Barbara, if I could bring you into the conversation, I'd be curious sort of CAMFED's experience along those lines of cultivating champions and policy alignment.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you to Brookings for meeting us here in Brookings instead of Morogoro or Dar es Salaam. We've been meeting before the COVID outbreak. But yes, the model, the CAMFED model of the learner guide is started in a different way. In fact, almost the opposite of what was happening in Jordan, in the sense that the learner guide is homegrown, grassroots level, designed organically by communities themselves. The girls that CAMFED supports through school, secondary school, come back to their schools to begin to, first of all, mentor the girls that in the school that are learning there, and deliver a life skills program that sort of helps the learners to navigate the barriers that the girls also faced as they were going through school. So our approach took that into consideration. We wanted to ensure that because it is homegrown and grassroots rooted, our route for integrating it in the system should also be rooted in the grassroots. And what happened then was that we realized that we needed to work with local knowledge champions. Those champions in the rural areas, like district education officials, elected officials, also the teachers and head teachers, who first of all were familiar with the impact of the learner guide program itself, but also who would sit in policy making bodies at that level. And they would reference our work in their meetings. They will connect us to opportunities for integration, and also would give us an idea of what components of the learner guide would be easily integrated into the national system. So our champions based in the rural areas were our best allies. But we also realized that the nature of the learner guide itself is that it is broad-based and cut across several ministries. It was not just embedded in the Ministry of Education, but other ministries, the Ministry of Youth, the Ministry of Community Development. So we also needed a multi-sectoral sort of team that would help us with the integration. We then realized that, well, at grassroots level, that would be fine, but we needed also other levels, multiple levels also important, in the sense that the middle level structure of governance is quite critical in issues of integration, because we realize that the top level officials sort of are the targets of changes when there's a new government, for example. And focusing a lot at the top level would sort of be problematic for us. So we also realized that we needed to engage with middle-level officials as well. They are the technocrats, after all. They are the ones that sort of advise the ministers and the permanent secretaries. And they are the ones also that connect the lower level to the top level. So they are also a critical level to engage with as champions. So we would have champions at the grassroots, champions in the middle level, but also we realized that top level is also important, as Dr. Ali was saying, and we knew that and the centralized nature of the Tanzania government required that we also engage top level management, because most of the decisions are made there. And if we fail to capture attention at that level, we'll have a problem. So, and I have an example of our biggest champion at one point was the permanent secretary himself of the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, who after visiting our learner guide programs in the field and witnessing also the impact of the learner guide, sort of facilitated the approval, at least in a partial approval of the learning materials of the learner guide for use in schools that were partnering with CAMFED. And then we were advised that we needed to go through a process of adjusting and adapting the program and getting it through the tier officials so that we can meet the requirements of government with My Better World curriculum, which is at the center of the learner guide program. So no one size fits all. We needed these multiple entry points, and also the fact that we needed strategic partnerships as well. You know, for integration, you need to be alert to where the authority lies in some of these processes. So we needed to ensure that we garnered the right partnerships to help us find route or location in the main system.
Thank you so much, Barbara. So Tepe, I'd love to turn to you. What's sort of a key learning or insight from Youth Impact's journey in mainstreaming integration?
Thank you so much, Jenny, for that question. And to Brookings, right? This work began 5 years ago to really document and put the key pieces together and reflect together on our scaling journey. And when I hear from Barbara, from Fostan, and Dr. Ali, we all share a lot of similarities. But one of the two things that I can mention that are very particular to our experience. So first, you know, as an organization, we are an NGO. We have, you know, signed a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Education and Skills Development to be able to scale to all primary schools in the country. So, you know, by the year 2027. So to date, we have reached 25% of primary schools. So we still have a long journey ahead. One of the main key things that I think is important is that, you know, we implement the Teaching at the Right Level program, but after a term, one is able to see, you know, visible results under a short time frame. And that really encourages teachers to see that there's actually progress, that learning is actually happening, and use these results to actually make decisions around moving a student to progress to another level, or actually even, you know, focus your attention on the child if they still are still growing in a particular subject. So really using data for immediate decision making, you know, changes teachers' perceptions so that they actually know that it's working, and the government is excited about it because, you know, everyone wants learning to improve, right? And that's, I would say, a common ground for all actors. Another thing that we really learned from this experience is the importance of following the leader or having champions, especially at regional level. So very much, I would say, at headquarters, this is where policy is happening. These are where convenings ought to be taking place. But when you come to the region, regional directors have you know, the power to make decisions on policy as well as programming. And if you have champions within that regional level, you know, they're able to inspire teachers to do more. They're also able to co-create goals with school heads to be able to really, you know, get the program up and running and hold teachers accountable for them to actually deliver it. So one of the big insights is to really focus, you know, attention and follow the leader.
And what we have done and what it actually means is that we are working with regional directors that want to see the program implemented in their particular regions. But also it's important, that they're the champions and really make sure that it's actually embedded within their structures. And this has really, Jenny, shown us that it can work. We have regional directors that really love teaching at the right level, that, they champion it when they're talking to their bosses, when, they want to actually, inspire teachers to do more. They really have experienced, the magic of the results. And also the power of teaching at the right level, that they too own it in such that they can, push towards progress.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I know we're going to open up for questions in a moment, but I'd love to just ask one more quick question, at least of one of you, if not all. So, Fostan, I'm thinking about how all the panelists spoke about the importance of aligning with policy and national priority, the importance of champions at various levels, right, of not only the government system, but also outside of the government system. But if I may put you on the spot sitting in government, there's a lot of good initiatives out there, right? And a lot that's aligning with these national policies, and a lot that have the incentives in place. But how does the government think about identifying and thinking about which of these initiatives might make sense to take up within the government structure?
Thank you, Jenny. Well, to make the right decisions, we need data. So it's important to have data in all our processes. So we assessed the various approaches that we had tested out. So there were pilot programs for 4 different approaches, and then at the end we assessed, there was an external assessment actually, that showed results. For some, the results were acceptable. For others, the results were quite poor indeed. But the teaching at the right level gave the best results. So it was based on this rational data that we could tell the decision makers, these are the results that the programs had, and it's on that basis that the choice was made. But so, to repeat myself, data was at the basis of everything. And in the field, when you implement the processes, but if you don't take the time to collect all the information that can help in the decision-making process, afterwards things become more complicated. And that's where in the past we have had issues. As I said before, we carried out various experimentations, but that didn't really lead to any good results because we did not have this wisdom to collect the data to help us. But when we chose the TAL, teaching at the right level, we understood that in order to implement this program, we needed to have simulations to show the government of Côte d'Ivoire, if we choose teaching at the right level and if we want to scale up, these are the conditions in which to do this. So this was the importance of data. So we need to go through this simulation process to present to the government that by 2025, 2027, in terms of projections, this is the number of children that will be better trained. This is the number of teachers that will have to be trained, and this is all the material that will support the process. So we costed the whole process, and this allowed Côte d'Ivoire to engage in this process and invite, gather around the table all the relevant partners and present to them our project to deal with this learning gaps, and the partners saw indeed the justification for what we were presenting, and therefore they accepted to support us in this journey.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I want to open it up now because I know we're getting short on time. We had a few questions that came in online that I'll certainly try to weave in, but why don't we start by opening it up to our audience here. And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself as well. Yes, please.
Hello? Okay. Hi, Cameron Busaka. I'm a student at the University of Maryland, and I'm doing my research, my dissertation on scaling. And I'm curious if you could speak about the kind of the issue of ownership. So obviously, when it's coming within the government, right, then there's how do you pass on ownership to the local levels or to these other actors? And in the other direction, it sounds more like in the CAMFED, when it's starting at these local levels, how do you pass on ownership to individuals within the government or other local levels?
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question, a question I think that we also grappled with at the beginning of this particular program. We sort of, the real-time scaling lab itself is a combination of stakeholders that represent various institutions and organizations. They themselves sort of guide us as to, first of all, how we can achieve integration and which components of our program would be easily scaled. And for us, that's how the ownership aspect comes into the implementation of the program, because we allow the members of the real-time scaling lab to own the process. They will guide us. We think that for the learner guide, it is the material curriculum of My Better World that is sort of, the government will be attracted to integrating. It is also material that they think can easily align with materials that the government is producing around life skills. So we take advantage of processes in government, of them developing guidelines, for example, or curriculum for their own life skills, and embed our own life skills component into there. And there's a very good example in Tanzania, where the government was developing a life skills program under a World Bank funded project called SEQUIP. And in that program, they were developing content for that particular curriculum. And the learner guide program curriculum of My Better World was readily available. And so that opportunity sort of helped us to sort of gradually hand over the content to government, in the sense that we sort of were already available. We had the material already available. Working on a technical committee that was developing that curriculum worked very well for us. And for us, that was a good entry point for sort of transferring ownership to government. So I'm giving that one example.
Thank you, Barbara. Any other responses?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So, I think in the initial, early stages, I used to think that, you develop a program and then it's going to, after the pilot stage, you can hand it over to government, to fully own it. But I think the more we are working, the more we're realizing that, there ought to be systems of support. Even within, the ownership of, government taking over a program. So what we do is we actually have a team that's dedicated to supporting government and government implementers, as well as government staff, even throughout their journey of scaling teaching at the right level. So we have, sub-regional officers and regional coordinators that sit within the government offices to be able to provide that technical support. We've also are in this journey where now we are working with the government to train them on implementing and delivering training to other teachers on teaching at the right level, which is an interesting journey now because it has, really shape-shifted how we started, where, youth impact used to be the primary technical leads on training, but now we're actually starting to build, this within government for them to be able to train their own teachers. And we believe that if this continues, and we are also seeing that, government, is taking this on, success looks like they, are the ones leading, right, the trainings, but also leading the monitoring and all the other aspects. That's the level of ownership we want to get to, but I think it's also important that, we do also provide that support in their journey to, full ownership and integration.
Yes,
Can I
please,
just
Dr.
make
Ali.
a quick note here, please? I think in our program, it's nationally owned. And indeed, it's National Financial Education Project. For one reason, just to comment on what Faustine just said earlier, for example, over the last 9 years, we had changed 5 ministers of education, but the program kept going the same. It's a national program. And each one can claim that it is his or her own program. For example, in Jazz and Ministry of Education, we have developed the curriculum together, and we're implementing that. We are training the teachers and so on. For banks, they say, no, the program is ours because we are providing the support. Now, for Ministry of Planning and Ministry of Finance, no, this is our program, we're supporting it because it's going to create financial awareness. So everybody, that program is indeed, it's a national financial education project. It's owned nationally. And I think that's, okay, it was, I wouldn't say it was hammered, but that's how it was built and that's how it was designed.
Thank you both. I mean, I'm struck by all three of you, and I want to see Faustin, would you like to add anything?
Yes, indeed. I just wanted to say that in terms of ownership, even if Côte d'Ivoire, we adopted teaching at the right level in its implementation as any change process, there are difficulties. And one of the difficulties was that the teachers had the impression that they were asked to do extra work. So we needed to help them understand that this was a new approach that would lead to better results. But beyond that, we have to say that the ownership in and of itself of the whole process stems from the ability of the minister and all the ministries to convince all the stakeholders along the line to say that when we have a goal to reach, our goal was to improve all the scores when we assess our kids in terms of literacy and numeracy, and that each one of the stakeholders be aware of their own role within this production line, if you will, and that if through the meetings that we have carried out and through the various institutions that we set up to create the teaching at the right level, because we created steering committees and monitoring committees, and since there's this monitoring, the teacher, when he sees that people that there's oversight over their work, this brings pressure to bear on the teacher. But so at the outset they thought that they were asked to do something extra, but at the end of the day they understood that this helps us to reach our goal, and everybody gained ownership in the whole process.
Thank you so much. Do we have time for? No, we don't have time.
Stop.
See, I knew this was going to be my challenge. We could stay up here talking all afternoon. Well, I certainly hope the conversation continues outside and online, and certainly, as we say, this is a scaling journey. Well, this is sort of the culmination of the findings from this phase of our partnership together. It's certainly not the end, and we're continuing to learn together. I just want to say, I mean, there's so many points that were raised on this panel that are things that we learned from all of you all, and I was just reminded and struck by them. I think this idea of the need to cultivate and sustain champions at multiple levels of the system, and I know Barbara and Tepi particularly talked about the importance of that middle level and navigating these changes in leadership over time, and certainly those who are working closest in many ways to the issues. This notion of fostering collaboration and ownership, thank you for that great question. You know, we talk sometimes about policy adoption and how important that is, but we also know policy adoption doesn't automatically translate to changes in the classroom. And so I think, Dr. Ali, your example of that level of ownership across the system is so critical to really see that change. And certainly, you know, this notion of data being central to decision making, but data also in terms of visible results, right? I mean, I think we heard from you, Barbara, with the permanent secretary. We heard from you, Tepe, with the teachers in the classroom, how important it really is to see that visible change. So many, I think, wonderful insights and nuggets for us to all take forward. So I want to thank you for so much, and all of the colleagues that have been part of this initiative, to Alan Simsim and our partners in the Philippines, who are certainly here with us in spirit, but not here with us this week at Brookings. And thank you all so much. Again, just the beginning of this journey, learning journey together. Thank you. Now, Omar, I'd love to turn it over to you for closing remarks.
Well, thank you all. This was a wonderful panel, the previous panel and the World Café. Thank you all for coming and being part of this journey. I hope that today a small window was open for you to see 5 journeys and 6 journeys in our book of scaling, or in our report, of how small initiatives or large-scale national initiatives grew, and what that journey looks like in terms of its complexities, its adaptabilities, its patience. I think 2 points that I want to highlight towards the end is takeaways that I'm taking with me, is that at the heart of these journeys is a desire to make education more relevant, more quality, increase the quality, increase the equity. And all of these initiatives are addressing a particular problem in their contexts. They're purpose-driven initiatives that peg the energy that all of these partners have brought to address that large-scale SDG goal that we all have of quality, relevant, equitable, inclusive education for all. We see that it's possible to make this journey towards this larger international goal that we have, but a key component of that is collaboration. And we're thankful for all of our partners for helping us learn through this process, opening up a window for us over the last 5 years to be part of their journey as we try to see how scaling happens. And what we're learning is that at the heart of this, it's contextual. Understanding your context. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. Understanding your purpose, understanding where you're doing the innovation, why you're doing it, who is involved, and how all of this comes together for us to reach that larger goal. And then this process of data and research has to be collaborative. It has to be action-based research, participatory research, in which we all come together at international level like this, but more importantly at the local level where you have all of your partners that you've brought in to have the different perspectives. And because education is complex, it involves everybody, it affects everybody, it projects nations into future in terms of where they're going, and it could create problems if it's not done right. My background is from Afghanistan, and I see the situation in there and how not engaging everybody collaboratively and having all the stakeholders around a table can create problems in terms of decisions that harm millions of people. So thank you very much. I would like to thank every one of you for joining us here today. I would like to thank our virtual audience, and I would like to extend a special thank you to our CUE team, to our Brookings team, especially to Molly and Maya, who worked tirelessly to put this together, this convening, to Nika and Tracy and Quentin for helping out in these days. Thank you very much. None of this would have been possible without all of this collaborative work within CUE. So I'm not going to take more time. We have coffee in the same place that we had it previously for you to continue mingling. And we have about 30 minutes for that. And I have one special request for all of our lab members to please come up to the stage. We have our wonderful photographer, and thank you for the interpreters. That was really helpful. And our graphic designer who made all of these nice posters possible. So if the lab members could come up, we'll do a joint picture, I believe. Thank you all.